Good evening again. I'm stuck in snow, and I was sitting and thinking, and this idea came up, and it is regarding immigration. And I'll tell you a story before I tell this idea. When I was a kid, growing up in this tiny village in southwestern Pakistan, in the Balochistan province of Pakistan, near Quetta. There was a tiny village where I lived. I was born in the village, and but my grandfather had come from another village. He was an imam in the local mosque, and then the leader of the village, or the malik of the village, gave him land so he can build a home for his children later on. So that's how we settled in this village. But my grandfather, he came from another village from across a few hills, um, not even mountains, but some hilly area. And behind that hilly mountain, there was the village that my grandfather came from. So in today's terms, it's 40 minutes drive, or not even that, about 40 minutes probably to an hour. But anyway, that just means we literally came from across this hill. And so that's not that big of a migration, right? It's literally very local. And so growing up as children, but then as teenagers, children go to school as we all did, and then to the mosque for lessons, and then play around in the village. And it was one of the most enjoyable experiences, as most, or probably all childhoods are. There is a lot of joy, quite incredible, which you don't really get later on, right? You get other things, but you don't really get the joy, the feel the joy. So in this village, there was a lot of joy for us as children. Um, Especially my mother was married from a family which owned more land, and we were the unlanded. We didn't have land. We didn't own land in the village, and others did. So those who did were sort of landed, more local, right? It was more in in the perform the performed script than literally written. Of course, it was unwritten, but it kind of, you felt it the moment you crossed the unstated line. So it would come out, for example, in very playful things with children, right? So we used to play, but we also used to fight. And there were times when we fought, and these kids would tell us, "Migrants, we will deport you, or we would deport you," right? And of course, as back then, I didn't really, or we didn't really take this seriously, but it kind of stayed with me as to why these kids called us migrants, and right, and dismissed us as not local to the land, or native to the land, in the that sort of proximate, immediate sense, right? So we're not from that land per se. Um, but yeah, so this, looking back at this story, and then there is another layer to it, right? So we were not, our family was not native, and that was what we felt like with these kids, right? They would say, like, we would migrate you, and now you question, like, I'm sure adults talked about it in different ways, in different terms. Again, we had a lot of fun, very grateful, of course, to the help to our grandfather, but there were also these simultaneous feelings of, like, not being native to the land because we didn't own agricultural land. That was the only piece of land we had. So it's felt like we feel it, right? It's dismissed, of course. People don't think about it, but you look back and you think back at this and you see patterns. So then during the late 80s and the 90s, when because of the Afghan war, many Afghan migrants fled, were forced by, of course, this conflict in their midst, an unending conflict. And a lot of these people came to Pakistan. I think some went to Iran, and in Pakistan, particularly in the north, in Peshawar, and then also in Quetta, the South Balochistan. So the there are these are the bordering sort of regions. So we had Afghan migrants in our village who usually um, farmed the land of the local people, and in exchange they would get to live and had some sort of a compensation that they were paid. But we didn't consider them as our people. We call them migrants. Majir in Pashto, right? Mahajir, yeah, Majir. And so, to the point that local people were so racist towards these people, the Afghans, including us, that we wouldn't want to eat at their home. And we were children. We learned it from others, of course, right? But there was this condescension, this condescending attitude that we had towards these Afghans. Um, People would say all kinds of um, inappropriate things about them, and they were not allowed to integrate. And they were also then a lot of them were forced out, but a lot of them were also accommodated by political parties and student associations and I mean politics, Pashtun nationalist politics, and let's say the Quetta city was tremendous work done right for the incorporation or accommodation of Afghans. But I mean that is being, of course, now um, destroyed and with shameless cruelty by the Pakistani state. So a bit of a digression, but what I am, I think, alluding to is, or what I'm trying to hint at, is that racism is just so human. And then I felt it in Lahore. I then came to the United States, and then you feel it. I have felt it here, of course, and we, by cops and so on. And so to link it back to immigration, I just, at the beginning, I said that I want to talk about immigration, and then through this story, that it's not just here in the U.S. And we found it in our village. We felt it in our village. We were told about it. That's how we we grew up with biases, and um, that's. I'm just saying. I think it is not. It is unexceptional. It's not exceptional to one place, um, and then I think in more of global context. I mean, in Europe, in the United States, and especially, I mean, these weeks and past months and weeks, and even before that, I mean, the issue of immigration is just insane, insanely polarized, and I and we see what has been happening, and there is what I'm saying is that I'm not surprised by it because I think human beings, it's not right, but that's what happens. I mean, fear, of others, fear of strangers, fear of the unknown is so much in most human beings. And does that make it right? No, of course it doesn't make it right. I mean, I am also not saying that like we are doomed, or we are um like I am not necessarily taking a predetermined position or predeterministic position on this, that we're doomed and there is nothing we can do. But I feel like it's just not anything special or anything unique, because I mean, as we are speaking, the Pakistanis are doing the same thing to Afghan migrants. I've seen footage, images of mothers and children and the elderly and young men and women, and I mean everybody suffering so much. Why? We have seen it in South Africa to other African migrants. So I think, I mean, I'm not saying just because it exists everywhere, it should exist or it is right. No, it's not. I mean, it is, of course, fueled by fear. It is, of course, fueled by strangeness. It is, of course, fueled by difference. It is, of course, of all, above all, by very fair mongering politics, you know. And we know that, of course. I mean, it's I think that amplifies that, really. um it I don't know what would be the right word. Like, it instigates that instinct, right? Like, the whole thing that really is done is to instigate the instinct. I mean, and through the spread of lies and propaganda, and really the erasure of truth, the difference between truth and fiction. It's with this administration, it's just insanely, I mean, impossibly difficult for people to probably even realize. Or, uh, I mean, there is a fair amount of realization. I think that would be mistaken, right? Or I would be mistaken assuming that there is, like, people are aware what is going on, but I think the damage, quite a big part of the damage is done. So I think there is no panacea, um, or I don't know how you spell or pronounce that word, panacea or panacea, whatever it is. You know what I mean. There is no cure. There is no, like, quick fix and cure to this kind of a problem. And I mean, and yeah, a lot of the violence and insanity that must stop. Of course, like, that's insane. But I also think that, um I mean, and this is not also something new, right? The US, it was good for quite some time, like, fairly, relatively safe space for people. But also, I mean, it's not like in a constant sense, but there were periods of relative peace, and so it's not that it is completely unimaginable or that it is unachievable, but that it requires work, that it requires good education, that it requires civic and humane education about human difference, and but also human similarities, also the potential for kindness and empathy, and knowledge of why people leave homes. And I think more humanity. It's not that these sorts of ideals are out of our the range of our imagination. They are in the range of very much in the range of our imagination. They have been in the range of our imagination for hundreds of years, you know. But I think the problem is when we don't pay attention, right? When we don't uh, stop, slow down, and ask questions, and but also make effort, right? Maybe buy a book, read a book, and um, and be, I think, curious about the world, about your own mind, and using a little bit of it. I think that's why I don't know if there is such a thing as being an existentialist, but I think I truly very much believe in or admire the philosophy of existentialism. I think we are of- we have been influenced and shaped by socializations, as I told through the story of my childhood, and right, most people are influenced by these sorts of things like society and parents and schools and education and mosque and everything, right? Sometimes for good, sometimes for worse, but in most cases, in it's the later. Um, so I think to unlearn all of those things requires curiosity. It requires also the belief in human freedom that we and responsibility. Like without freedom, there is no responsibility. If you don't feel you're free, then you're not feeling responsibility. And if you don't feel you're free, you're also not feeling that ethics apply to you or ethics applies to you. I mean, I think that was the central argument in Simone de Beauvoir, the French name again, notoriously difficult. Her whole point was ethics and responsibility. I mean, freedom and responsibility and authenticity. I mean, and Sartre, Jean Paul Sartre, and others made this quite clear, right? That we're free in constrained socio-historical limits and constraints, but we also make decisions. And I think we're free. And now, why does this matter? It matters to immigration because people have to like take charge of their minds and brains and minds. That you have to think for yourself. You have to do a little bit of work. And to I know you could say what sources to trust. There are all of those issues, but some of this is also feeling. I think feeling our maybe this is spiritual side of me that is coming out is that I think we probably know what feels right and what doesn't feel right. Right? I think beating people up in anger, shooting at them, it's just not. I don't think that must feel good. I think that must feel horrible. People do it. I don't know, but it's just doesn't right. It's not right, right? Um, and I mean, but to come back to freedom. Sorry, this is too long. To come back to freedom, ethics, and responsibility. The core ideas in existentialist philosophy that we are influenced by things, but we're also free, right, to make decisions and to be responsible, reasonable, acceptable, tolerable, intolerant, and free thinking beings, and not buy into very murderous and cruel and anti-human and unhumane and inhumane ideologies and practices. And so the whole point of the existentialist philosophy also is that people who are unfree in their minds are more likely to fall for extremist, fascist, and fundamentalist ideas and movements, right? They jump on to these things because they don't have private information versus public, like the reliance on public information, especially in notoriously uh, populist places with populist leaders like Trump. So it's very hard. This is where we are, right, with this whole thing. But I think, yeah. So education and kindness and empathy and also self doubt that we Pakistanis or many countries in the Muslim world, in the Middle East, and in, I mean, most people, there are no exceptional societies. All societies um, are um, discriminatory in some ways, and as I said, in my experience as a kid growing up, right? But also, of course, I think, I mean, it's wrong anywhere and everywhere, but it doesn't make what, it shouldn't be normalized. It's just important to see that when we talk about, like, when I talk about white people, or when we talk about white people or like Trump's followers, I mean, it could happen in a lot of places, and that by sort of identifying the fundamental instinctual element that it exists in all societies through telling my story, and then the implication that I had in it also myself, that we didn't really think of Afghans as full people, right? That was true growing up. Like, that was true. Like, self accountability and self doubt. That's where things really, I think, shift, or at least we should try to change, right? And if anything, I think, Husserl, the German philosopher and phenomenologist, right, in the 20th century, he said Greeks were better philosophers because they were traders. They traded with different cultures, people from different cultures. So they had these cross cultural interactions, which made them question their own selves. So when we come in conversation or in interaction with other cultures, those experiences tell us that we are not beyond questioning, that we have accountability to go through also, So it's not particularly, like essentializing one group as like, or reducing one group to like just um, absolutely horrible group and inherently criminal and this and that is, I think that narrative also doesn't help. Yeah, we can identify, of course, structures and patterns of power and domination and the injustice and violence it inflicts on other people, right? And in sometimes there are, of course, in particular moments like Israel Palestine. I mean, state of Israel, of course, like, you can't equate the two sides. It's just they're incomparable. But I'm just broadly, generally, I think human beings. I was referring to the question of immigration is human being is imperfect, incomplete, and scared and full of fear, and you know those instincts have to be understood and learned about and be aware of, and then retrain. And the thought process, even if it's hard, it's like going up a mountain, right? Intellectual work really is like going up a mountain. Sometimes it's so hard you want to quit, but then you keep going. And so those who keep going, I think, become more, in more cases, like, I would hope, become more fair and critical to everything, and just become more human than the rest of us. So, Kant's essay, The Enlightenment, I think, um, I mean, there are other essays which have changed lives, right? Like, um, Audre Lorde's Uses of Anger, a speech to, I think, mostly white women. Powerful, powerful speech. So these kinds of texts have changed humans, and ultimately, I think change comes from reimagination of things gone horribly wrong, and a sort of a reactivity or a recreation of a different, or I'm not saying, I mean, there are the infrastructure, for example, for a particular political ethics, like in the American society democracy, it has existed. But also, it's in the Constitution, right? Um, Now, you can't say it has been perfect. I mean, far from it. But there is a moral imagination, right, which is being now threatened and which is being now dismantled. But that moral imagination can only be, I think, activated, reactivated, um, planted. Planted sounds really bad, but it only has to, not only has to, but I think it comes from engagement in ideas and discourses, and for that you need freedom, for that you need civility, for that you need friendship, civic friendship. Sometimes it becomes impossible, but you come back to it, right? Like, you can't, go to war. That we have seen, and we're not strangers to that either. But yeah, I think it is the sort of refreshing of moral imagination by which America has lived, by which most societies should live, all societies should live. um, Again, just to be nuanced here, black people, the natives, and I mean, there has been incredible amount of violence, and that is just horrible, absolutely. But again, with all of that considered, it seems to me that essentializing places, essentializing people, essentializing groups as like inherently crazy and possibly racist, or like than the rest of us and so on, also doesn't necessarily help move things forward. I think a more holistic and realistic approach, in the sense that there are these things everywhere in all countries, right? Of course, I'm by sharing this, I guess I'm trying to show that probably and not that there is a crisis of the use of language to describe immigration, that oh, people don't know how to describe it, or no, not at all. But I think just suggesting that this awareness that we're all humans and we're all fallible, we're all scared, we're all at the very fundamental level, right? But then we should also work, we're also free, we should try to be kind and to feel like the world belongs to everyone. I mean, yeah, easier said than done, but I think it's the mountain. Are you willing to climb? Are you willing to try? Or Plato, Plato's allegory of the cave, right? That are you willing to make the journey from being tied in a position where the only thing you see are the representations of things happening outside, right? The shadow of fire on the wall is all you see, because that is, I think, the default condition of most human beings, right? Ignorant. Are we willing to untie ourselves, create conditions for untying ourselves, and then willing to go up the ladder, go up the stairs into the sun? Now, I mean, you can criticize Plato for his own views about women and so on. That is totally fair and legitimate. But I think the idea that, yes, we're all ignorant, we all have to learn. Some of us are lucky who happen to be in circumstances and places and where they learn from others are not. But it's also about our interaction with data points. Like, when do we come to know about a different view? So there are those things also, the external, I think, resources, and or the lack of resources, or all of those things are there. But I think probably it's also the internal sort of world, right? The inner immigration that also has to happen simultaneously with seeking out. Then there is the seeking in. So the two, I think, have to go hand in hand. Now that sounds like an impossible policy, right? But I think I'm not in the business of policies. I'm not a practitioner. I think I'm more of a thinker. I am a thinker, and that's I guess I see my role. Oh, and a teacher, right? So I teach and I think I do write um, academic stuff, and but yeah, that's so. Not to make this even longer, I think humanities, public humanities, which is also being attacked by the Trump administration, philosophy, public philosophy, logic, spirituality, all of these are like core elements to make us human beings better, to teach us what is it that we know, what is it that we don't know, what is it that we are, and the things we have made, why, and human nature and human mind and soul and heart and all of these things, right? It's fascinating, of course, so, but these things we need for creating systems and institutions and processes and laws and places where we treat all human beings fairly and freely and equally, and where we try to have the least amount of you know negative impact on people in a society. I mean, that's the hope. That's, I guess, that should be the vision. And humanities, really, that's what they do in different ways. I mean, in philosophy and anthropology, I teach the anthropology of the Middle East. So you teach about these people and the way they are. And a lot of these will always be provisional, and this truth seeking and temporary and um, changeable and questionable. But we try. I think we have gotten a lot of things right. We have also gotten a lot of things wrong. So those two also go hand in hand, I think. But nevertheless, I think even if it is provisional, even if it's, although, I mean, there are, like, being nice to someone, being kind to someone, it's not a provisional truth. It's permanent, right? Being kind to immigrants, it's a permanent truth. It's in Christianity. I think a lot of Christians that I meet, they tell me this is not Christianity. And we are seeing that people are coming out, right, from churches and defending other people, their neighbors and co-workers and friends from these attacks. So um, there is that. Um, but yeah, the humanities are attacked, and there is an attack on free expression. There is an attack on freedom of speech. There is an attack on freedom of protest, and these are exactly the things that make us humans and civilized and enlightened. So we need to remember. We need to remember this is in a lot of places, and it's wrong in all of these places. It shouldn't happen in any of these places. And yeah, and just to think, I think about the world and immigration in particular in that way. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes. It got the battery was low. But yeah, I think I made my point. Thank you. This is a long video. I don't know if you will watch, but thank you. Bye.